This episode is brought to you by Private Internet Access. Learn more at the end of this video. This series is going to be full of spoilers. Only the first paragraph or two will be devoid of spoilers. I also curse like a sailor at times. Don't say I didn't warn you. So with this episode of Movies That Don't Suck, I'm clearly not going to be sticking to 90s movies alone. This is kind of the episode where this show is going to put on the big boy boots and try standing even remotely close to the height of my personal inspiration for this show, Mikey Newman of Movies with Mikey fame. One thing I can certainly say I've taken his wisdom from him speaking in his videos is to not make up my opinion on a movie until I've seen it a few times and let it settle in my mind. It's a lofty goal, I feel, considering he actually has a formal education in the field of movies, whereas my knowledge has come from a life of appreciating film. Many of the movies I've seen were shown to me by my parents, who both were movie buffs in their own right, and both introduced me to a wide spectrum of genres, including of course watching behind-the-scenes content, and I feel lucky to have had that growing up. With that said, my goal is inspired by this quote from Cormac McCarthy's Philosophy, not an endorsement, a quote he said on the Oprah Winfrey Show, also not an endorsement, which I first heard sampled on Nakey Jakey's song 10K, definitely an endorsement, his celebration of reaching 10,000 subscribers. You always have this image of the perfect thing which you can never achieve, but which you never stop trying to achieve. I think that at the core of it, there's this image you have, this interior image of something that is absolutely perfect, and that's your signpost and your guide. We'll never get there, but without it, you won't get anywhere. Nakey Jakey is a huge inspiration for me, with one of his biggest selling points as a creator being that he's genuine with how he makes his videos. Anyway, while I'm sure there will be plenty of 90s movies on this show in the future, a few Tarantinos for sure, I wanted to cover something much more recent and, more importantly, something that means quite a lot to me. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a 2019 film which has received pretty much one of three kinds of reviews: scalding rage, disappointment, or complete unabashed critical acclaim. Then again, that can be said about most reviews of media made by industry icons like Tarantino, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Hideo Kojima, Maynard James Keenan, etc. I'd say I'm likely going to fall into the latter category, but with some caveats I'd like to address before getting into it. I don't think this is quote-unquote the deepest movie Tarantino's ever done or anything like that. It is a personal film for sure, but it's not like it's a biopic or something and touches on some deep moral topic that makes one think philosophically or reflecting on their life, you know. I do, however, find it to possibly be the most entertaining of his works despite having little action throughout. Many people are saying that it's a pretentious film and that Tarantino is just reflecting not only on the 60s, but also that he's getting old.
It's official, old buddy. Well, it has been.
What are you talking about? What did that guy tell you?
Told me the goddamn truth is what he told me.
However, the biggest thing that I took from this movie as a whole is a simple notion that is reflected all throughout this movie. There ain't no business like show business. I'm well aware that this movie is akin to Inglourious Basterds, where it plays with real history and gives us a cathartic, good ending, and while that is important to the presentation, that isn't important to the message to me. With that said, here's my background with this movie. I not only watched it in theaters twice, once the standard theatrical release, once the quote extended release with commercials for fictional products existing only in the Tarantino cinematic universe such as Old Chattanooga Beer and Red Apple Cigarettes, but I also bought the 4K collector's edition and made my own private cut, which adds in those commercials that were in the extended cut during my second viewing, as well as scenes that add quite a bit of substance to the overall feel of the movie, as well as context for certain conversations. These scenes include 2 additional commercials for Red Apple Cigarettes revolving around Rick's show, Bounty Law, an extended sequence from Bounty Law, an extension to the scene where Charles Manson visits the Polanski residence where he then goes to the landlord's place, an additional scene from the last show Rick did prior to doing Spaghetti Westerns, the pilot for Lancer, to introduce the characters and conflict, but even a fake quote behind the scenes clip where Wanamaker is coaching Rick on his character before they start shooting. This last mentioned scene ties in with not only the scene where he fails to remember his lines,
Line? Go fetch her and tell her what?
but also the scene where he surprises the director with his acting and improv skills. The reason I even mention that is that I think that it's something of a crying shame that there isn't a director's cut of the movie like this already included on the Blu-ray. I have the same complaint about Blade Runner 2049 in that there's the main movie, but also 3 prologue segments that would add perfectly to the movie if they were just all in one package. Instead, you have to go out of your way to watch them, and each of them has a kind of lengthy intro from the director of Blade Runner 2049, Denis Villeneuve. You can bet your sweet ass that Blade Runner and its sequel are movies I'm going to talk about. But I'm getting off topic here. Let's stick to talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So the opening spells out the themes of the movie pretty well, both in the extended version I saw in the theaters and the original theatrical cut. The extended cut shows those commercials to put you into the world, and then after the Sony Pictures logo, we see a clip of Bounty Law followed by a short behind-the-scenes look from NBC, where they show Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his stunt double Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. This immediately takes you out of the element of the show Bounty Law and takes you into the world of the Hollywood film industry. This is immediately followed by Rick and Cliff getting into Rick's Coupe de Ville, and Treat Her Right by Gene Kurtz and Roy Head starts to play. This part highlights the 2 protagonist focal points of the movie, Rick and Cliff's story, and Sharon, Roman, and Jay's story. The first time I watched this, I didn't think too much of this, but there are a couple of pretty important reasons for doing this. First, it's actually to set up a line a little later on in the movie where Steve McQueen starts talking about Sharon, Roman, and Jay. To reflect the first line from the song Treat Her Right, he says,
I'm gonna tell you a story.
He then spends some time explaining how Jay is basically hanging around because he knows that someday, Roman is going to fuck up with Sharon and Jay is going to be there to catch her as they fall apart. So not only does he use the line from the song, the story he tells is straight up a reflection of the title, Treat Her Right. Secondly, and more importantly, it's to set false expectations for the audience where the movie has all sorts of cues that line it up to look like a horror movie instead of your run-of-the-mill Tarantino bloodbath. I mentioned the 2 protagonist focal points, but there's a third focal point, which is that of the antagonists. If you're unaware, I'll let you know now. This movie is basically the Tarantino-verse version of what happened with the Manson family killings. To read right from the wiki about the Tate LaBianca murders, the murders were committed by Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel under the direction of Charles Manson. Watson drove Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian from Spawn Ranch to the residence on Cielo Drive. Manson was a would-be musician who had tried to get a recording contract with record producer Terry Melcher, who was a previous renter of the house with musician Mark Lindsay and Melcher's girlfriend Candice Bergen. Melcher had snubbed Manson, leaving him disgruntled. So that's the expectation that's set pretty early on, as we see the Cielo Drive street sign as Rick and Cliff drive home from meeting with Marvin Schwartz. Real guy, he was a producer and publicist for mostly Western movies and war movies after Marvin spells it out for Rick that the TV networks are starting to phase him out as quote-unquote the bad guy, playing the heavy on all of his roles.
You always play the bad guy on these shows?
Yeah.
So, and they have a fight scene at the end of it?
Not Land of the Giants or FBI, but the rest, yeah.
And you lose in the fight?
Of course, I'm the heavy.
Oh, that's an old trick pulled by the networks. So you hire a guy from a canceled show to play the heavy. Then at the end of the show, when they fight, it's hero besting heavy. What the audience sees is Bingo Martin whipping Jake Cahill's ass. Down goes you, down goes your career as a leading man.
This is all talked about prior to release, but I think unless you went out of your way to read articles about the movie, many people, especially in my age range, may not have known that this was a movie about the Manson family murders. Furthermore, even if you were aware of Charles Manson and what his cult did, you may not be aware of the finer details that Tarantino went to great lengths to add into the production. That doesn't make this movie, quote, deep, but it certainly makes it a technical marvel. Obviously, I'm not saying that detail alone makes it a technical marvel. Robert, or Bob Richardson, the director of photography, has been working with Tarantino on every film except one since Kill Bill, and he has shown time and time again that he knows what gives the most detail and tells the best story when it comes to shooting any particular shot. He normally shoots on digital, but part of why he goes back to Tarantino is the love of film, being able to shoot on different types of film. Tarantino loves film, and this movie is certainly his love letter to Hollywood.
When we first met, he wasn't sure whether they wanted to shoot this film in 70 or 35. And then it was like, okay, well maybe I'll only do the Lancer sequences in 70. Then it was no, because I still want to use a zoom. And with 65, there's no capability for a zoom. So that sort of shifted in a final way. We also shot Super 8, and we shot 16 black and white, and 16 Ektachrome because Kodak was kind enough to give us some test rolls. I think that those textures are important to this particular film. Textures overall, which is of course a soundscape you're talking about, the look and moving between size format from 240 to 185 or 133, but we did shoot those spherical elements.
One shot that not only stands out to me, but is used during part of the behind the scenes, is this shot where Rick is rehearsing for his part on Lancer. The camera goes over the house away from Rick and then shows Roman and Sharon walking out of the Polanski residence to get in the car, heading toward the Playboy Mansion party going on at the time. This shot is so damn spectacular, but there's so many just like it that I absolutely adore it, like all these. Opening shot of Rick and Cliff, every driving shot, the series of long shots leading up from leaving the Polanski residence all the way up until they're in the heart of the party. The long shot of the Bruce Lee scene, the shot introducing Rick to the little girl on Lancer, the shot of Sharon walking to her seat and dancing, pretty much the entirety of Lancer's pilot, the Rick freakout in his trailer, and the way he really shows every angle, even first person. More driving. And of course the closing shot, where Rick walks up the driveway of Sharon Tate with Jay Sebring. The lengths they went to make Hollywood look the way it did in 1969 is astounding too. I'm going to play some clips from this behind the scenes segment about transforming Hollywood into 1969's Hollywood Boulevard. Sit tight.
We shut down Hollywood Boulevard for this film and redid all the storefronts to replicate that exact year, 1969.
It was incredible to be immersed in Hollywood Boulevard for 4 straight blocks, and not only the storefronts and the recreation of theaters, but the extras and the vibe of what that time was like.
It's not just the billboards, it's like the little pamphlets in the store windows. Quentin was so intent on the detail, on recreating things of that era.
Hollywood Boulevard was the biggest locations challenge on this movie. If you do a Hollywood Boulevard closure, you have to have pretty much 100% of the merchants on board.
We broke down how many streets that we could handle, and it took months of actually drawing up the buildings, approaching how we could do it, practicing in illustration, and then figuring out how long we could close the store for before we shot, and just worked like an army, putting facades on, and then very rapidly dressing the storefronts to be able to shoot, and then just as rapidly flipping it all back because all of these were working stores.
One of the things that Hollywood Boulevard had that was so good is forever, that was the Theater Row in Los Angeles. Now, none of these anymore are still movie theaters. They've all turned into something else. But because of their historical significance, they've kept the theater marquees. So we could spruce them up and replace the neon of all those signs that are important.
We worked first in figuring out which ones we could rebuild. They went back to the full original look, the original neon. The exact movie of that date is actually what's on the marquee that was playing there. And that was very much Quentin's idea, to have what was playing this week in all these theaters.
Yeah, it was exciting to let the lights blink again on Hollywood Boulevard.
One aspect of this movie that I absolutely love are all of the shots of driving around. It's one thing to have cool driving shots or chase scenes, but it's another to have just cool clips of these actors really doing the driving. Brad Pitt drives like a boss pretty much all throughout, and we know he's actually driving because Tarantino does his best to get all of the practical shots that he can. Granted, in Pulp Fiction, for the scene with Bruce Willis and the taxi driver, it was just them in a car with a screen and a projector for the background, but I think that's because the focus of the shot was the conversation, not the driving itself. The music is also great pretty much all around. It really helps add to the element of 1969 and provides proper mood music for just about every scene we hear it in. Not in a way that it's in the background too much. There's many scenes where the music is front and center, and it works really well. There's also a lot of clips from shows from KHJ, the radio station of LA and Hollywood, that was considered by many to be the coolest AM radio station. It's strange how some commercials would feel like part of the soundtrack of 1969, but strange in a welcome way. The portrayals of real people were all pretty good too. I thought his iteration of Bruce Lee was alright, though here's what Tarantino had to say about the matter.
However, at the same time, Bruce Lee was kind of an arrogant guy. I mean, when I was, the way he was talking is kind of, I didn't just make a lot of that up. I heard him say things like that to that effect. And even the thing, people are saying, well, he never said he could beat up Muhammad Ali. Yeah, he did, all right? Not only did he say that, his wife, Linda Lee, said that. And the first biography I ever read was Linda Lee's Bruce Lee, the Man Only I Knew. And she absolutely said it. And but the thing about it, though, is, could Cliff beat up Bruce Lee? Okay, Brad would not be able to beat up Bruce Lee, but Cliff maybe could, all right? And then if you ask me the question, I think, okay, well, who would win in a fight, Bruce Lee or Dracula? It's the same question. It's a fictional character. If I say Cliff could beat Bruce Lee up, he's a fictional character, then he could beat Bruce Lee up. But the reality of the situation is this. Cliff is a Green Beret. He has killed many, many men in World War II in hand-to-hand combat. He is a killer. What is Bruce Lee talking about in the whole thing is what he admires are warriors. What he admires is combat. And boxing is a closer approximation of combat as a sport than martial art tournaments are. Well, Cliff is not even part of a sport that's like combat. He is a warrior. He is a combat person. So, if Cliff were fighting Bruce Lee in a martial arts tournament in Madison Square Garden, Bruce Lee would kill him. But if Cliff and Bruce Lee were fighting in the jungles of the Philippines in a hand-to-hand combat fight, Cliff would kill him.
Looking in the comments, a lot of people disagree. But I think this comment on IndieWire's article says it all realistically. To be fair, Bruce 100% won the first round, despite Cliff throwing, and in the only legitimate of the 3 rounds they seem even, albeit with Bruce not necessarily controlling the flow. I agree fully that the image of an unbeatable Bruce Lee is what the average person has, but let's not kid ourselves that even at his best, there were others who probably could have beaten him in a manner of speaking, like Cliff did. Realistically, you guys, there's always a bigger fish. Don't give me your antiquated reasoning that he was the absolute best. He was an amazing martial artist, but surely there was someone with less publicity who was better with billions of people on this planet. Cliff was a Green Beret according to Tarantino, so it makes sense to me that a man trained to kill, who has done so, would have a better chance at winning a fight than someone who's had to, in his own words, do this patty cake play fighting. Ultimately, what makes it all okay and actually work better is the fact that Tarantino says Cliff is a fictional character. If I want him to be more powerful than Bruce Lee, then he is in my story. It's the same question as who would win in a fight, Bruce Lee or Dracula.
It's refreshment time, folks.
Taste that beats the others cold. Pepsi pours it on. Taste that beats the others cold. Pepsi pours it on.
There is one thing I want to address before moving on with this review that is going to be relevant throughout any time that I choose to talk about Quentin Tarantino. He is infamous in some circles for the lengths at which he will put an actor through in order to get the shots he wants. For instance, in Kill Bill's shooting, Uma Thurman was subjected to 3 things that were rather extreme. Being choked, being spit on, and ending up in a wreck for a stunt driving down a sandy road at 40 miles an hour. After doing some research and reading Uma's perspective, then reading Tarantino's perspective, I have to side with Tarantino. Hear me out. Uma's biggest gripe was the driving stunt. Quentin said at the time, "I promise you the car is fine. It's a straight piece of road. Hit 40 miles per hour or your hair won't blow the right way and I'll make you do it again." Uma thought, but that was a death box that I was in. The seat wasn't screwed down properly. It was a sand road and it was not a straight road. Tarantino responds to this by saying, "Me and Uma had our issues about the crash. She blamed me for the crash and she had a right to blame me for the crash. I didn't mean to do it. I talked her into getting into the car. I assured her the road was safe, and it wasn't. The car might have even been dubious too, even if I didn't know that then. We had our issues about it. We weren't estranged, but we were over each other for a couple of years." Oddly enough, when the New York Times did a series on famous directors and their collaborators series, one was me and Uma. I remember being backstage, me with my people and Uma with hers. We were pleasant, but not like the close friends we had been. We weren't chumming like we'd been after this cooling off, this estrangement. Guess who should be the monitor of this New York Times piece? Larissa McFarquhar, the New York reporter who'd been on the Kill Bill set that fateful day. This was half a year after Kill Bill 2 had come out. We go up on the stage, we're going to do the show, and at some point doing that piece, me and Uma started talking in that back and forth verbiage in a way that we hadn't in a long time. She started making fun of me, teasing me, and next thing I knew, we were talking like Quentin and Uma again. The audience enjoyed our banter, and we kind of found each other again. We found each other on that stage, and we had a big dinner with our friends, and it was really cool. Sometime, shortly after that, we had a big dinner in the Soho House in New York, and there we dealt with all the car stuff and all the resentments she had toward me. The thing is, she felt I could have done better in protecting her in that movie, and we hashed it all out, put it behind her, and we've been fantastic friends ever since. Regarding the choking and the spitting, he said the following. "We've all seen movies where people get spit in the face. I'm assuming if it was a 2-shot and Michael Madsen spat in her face, there probably wouldn't be an issue. But that wasn't the shot. The shot was Michael Madsen had snuff juice, and you see him spit out a stream of snuff juice. Cut to Uma's face on the ground and you see it hit her. Naturally, I did it. Who else should do it? A grip? One, I didn't trust Michael Madsen because I don't know where the spit's going to go if Michael Madsen does it. I talked to Uma and I said, look, I've got to kind of commit to doing this to you. We even had a thing there. We were trying to do it with a plunger and some water. But if you add snuff juice to water, it didn't look right. It didn't look like spit when it hit her. When we tried that. It needed to be that mix of saliva and brown juices. So I asked Uma, I said, I think I need to do it. I'll only do it twice, at the most 3 times. But I can't have you laying there getting spit on again and again and again, because somebody else is messing it up by missing. It is hard to spit on people, as it turns out. Now, I love Michael. He's a terrific actor, but I didn't trust him with this kind of intricate work, of nailing this. So the idea is, I'm doing it, I'm taking responsibility. Also, I'm the director, so I can kind of art direct this spit. I know where I want it to land. I'm right next to the camera, so boom, I do it. Now, if I screw up and I keep missing, once we get to that 3rd one, if she doesn't want to do it anymore, well then that's on me. Frankly, if I asked an actor, a grip, or a stunt guy, hey Charlie, can you spit on Uma's face for this shot? Charlie's going to be so intimidated that first take that he's going to fuck it up. And he'll probably be intimidated on his 2nd take, and maybe by the 4th or 5th time he'll get his shit together. In that instance, we did our 3 takes and Uma said, if you really need a 4th go, go ahead, do a 4th one. The reporter then asks, what about the description of you choking Uma with the chain? Tarantino responds both about Uma Thurman and Diane Kruger. In the case of the choking, when Gogo, Chiaki Kuriyama, throws her chain ball at the bride, and the chain wraps around her neck, and then she's getting choked by it.
Frankly, I wasn't sure how we were going to shoot that scene.
Wrap a chain around the neck, you've got to see choking. I was assuming that when we did it, we would have maybe a pole behind Uma that the chain would be wrapped around so it wouldn't be seen by the camera, at least for the wide shot. But then it was Uma's suggestion, to just wrap the thing around her neck and choke her. Not forever, not for a long time, but it's not going to look right otherwise. I can act all strangly, but if you want my face to get red and the tears to come to my eye, then you kind of need to choke me. I was the one on the other end of the chain, and we kind of only did it for the close-up, and we pulled it off. Now, that was her idea. Consequently, I realized that is a real thing. When I did Inglourious Bastards and I went to Diane Kruger, and I said, look, I've got to strangle you. If it's just a guy with his hands on your neck, not putting any kind of pressure, and you're just doing this wriggling death rattle, it looks like a normal movie strangulation. It looks movie-ish. But you're not going to get the blood vessels bulging or the eyes filling with tears, and you're not going to get the sense of panic that happens when your air is cut off. What I would like to do, with your permission, is just commit to choking you with my hands in a close-up. We do it for 30 seconds or so, and then I stop. If we need to do it a 2nd time, we will. After that, that's it. Are you down to committing to it so we can get a really good look? It'll be twice and only for this amount of time. And the stunt guy was monitoring the whole thing. Diane said, yeah, sure. She even said on film in an interview, it was a strange request, but at that point I trusted Quentin so much that sure. We did our 2 times, and then, like Uma with the spitting thing, Diane said, okay, if you need to do it once more, you can. That was an issue of me asking the actress, can we do this to get a realistic effect? And she agreed with it. She knew it would look good, and she trusted me to do it. I would ask a guy the same thing. In fact, I would probably be more insistent with a guy. So you see, these stunts were performed with the consent of the actors performing. Furthermore, any beef that Uma had with Quentin had been hashed out, and the idea that Tarantino has an interest in savage violence against women is absurd at best, attempting a calculated character assassination in the name of false social justice at really. I don't condone the actions that Tarantino committed if they were done in a context other than making a film and doing so with the consent of the person he did them to, but that is indeed the context. I'm going to say this once, so take note, writers at The Guardian. Context matters. If you leave out context, you're painting the image just how you want it, to rile up the people who don't bother doing their research and finding out the information for themselves to build a fully realized picture of what happened. In Tarantino's words, if it wasn't him, somebody else would have had to take the responsibility. So he was the one to do it. If I was an actor working with Tarantino and he wanted my character to be strangled, fuck it, I would have agreed to it too, because it was in the pursuit of art. This interest in savage violence against women that The Guardian claims that Tarantino has should just be his, quote, interest in savage violence, period. Because if you look at the ratio of women to men killed in his movies, I can assure you that a hell of a lot more men are killed. Now, if Tarantino only ever made films like Death Proof, I could understand that position. But even Tarantino said that Death Proof was his worst movie. That's a topic for a different video entirely, but to inform you guys here, Death Proof is a movie about a homicidal stuntman who targets women he's aroused by. If you look at the plot of the 3 movies that he's made that revolve around women, do you want to know the big thing that stands out to me about them? They're all about empowerment of women. If you've never seen the movies listed on the screen, I recommend skipping to the timestamp listed, but if you don't mind, here's the full context with spoilers for the endings. In the second half of Death Proof, the bad guy gets his just desserts in a brutal fashion from the women he's targeting. Jackie Brown, a movie about a flight attendant who gets caught up in a mess with a drug and weapon kingpin. In the end, she not only helps the authorities track down the target, but she also kills the guy played by Samuel L. Jackson and gets off scot-free. And of course, the most famous, Kill Bill. Straight up, a woman is shot down with her to-be husband at her wedding rehearsal, seeks and gets revenge upon all those who wronged her. Even her former lover and partner in crime. Yes, she goes through immense hardships, but the goal of any properly empowering feminist feature should have hardships that protagonists must conquer. Otherwise, what's the conflict? Now before any of you get on your high horse and go, well, what about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where 2 women are killed at the end? Remember that this movie is a fictional version of a non-fictional event? Well, the 3 people from the Manson family that went to commit the murders at the Polanski residence the first night were Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel. The only difference is that in this iteration within the Tarantino-verse, Susan and Patricia were replaced with a couple of girls named Sadie and Katie.
Who's this Rick guy? Jesus Christ, Sadie, get it together! Rick Dalton played J.K. Hill in a cowboy show in the 50s called Bounty Law.
Fuck you, Katie. Sorry I don't know the name of every fascist on TV in the 50s.
Now be honest with yourself here. If you had a chance to sit in a room with sadistic fucks like those 3 and got to do whatever you wanted, wouldn't it look a little something like what happened at the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Every show on TV that wasn't I Love Lucy was about murder. My idea is, we kill the people who taught us to kill.
It's not like they were just shooting the shit. They acted on the idea she had.
And now, on with the show.
Now that all that is said and done, I want to talk about what originally made me really happy about this movie. Every little thing that happens leading up to the ending adds to it, which is why Tarantino wrote it the way he did. As far as I've seen in my handful of viewings, the continuity is airtight. It's not, quote, 3 different stories like Critical said in his review. There's only 2 times I've ever disagreed with him on his takes of movies and games. Death Stranding and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. His review on Death Stranding I think is more forgivable because Death Stranding is a much longer experience and for that it does ask a lot of the player. It can also be seen as boring because a lot of what you do in the game is just walking. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, on the other hand, I think it could have used another viewing or 2 before making that response. Any Tarantino film deserves multiple viewings for a review, at least 2 before settling on a critique, because he always packs layers and layers of detail into it. Remember how I said that one of the biggest lessons I learned from watching movies with Mikey was that I let a film settle before I make up my mind? Well, that was very relevant with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, especially when adding in the context of those extra scenes I put in my private cut of the film. In the opening act, we see Rick on Bounty Law, possibly as a rerun. Then shortly after, talking to a Hollywood producer who tries to convince Rick to move to Italy for a while and work on spaghetti westerns. Of course, Rick being the man he is, was very upset by this because that meant sacrificing his pride because of the low standard that many spaghetti westerns hold themselves to compared to American westerns, most notably, of course, being the Tower of Babel method of shooting the shot and then recording your language in post. While talking to Schwartz, we're also shown a clip of the movie The 14 Fists of McCluskey that Rick was in, giving some context to the fact that Rick was trained to use a flamethrower for that part.
Alright, that's too hot. Anything we can do about that heat?
Rick, it's a flamethrower.
Yeah.
We're then introduced to the Manson family cult. For people who have prior knowledge that this movie is about the Manson family, this may come off as a hint at the bloody ending, though not the one they anticipated. I believe the slow bleed of the Mansons into the story, as well as Roman and Sharon, was intended to give those viewers false expectations. What particularly sells me on this idea is the horror cues that are accompanied with the Manson family in just about every scene they're in. I didn't know this when I first watched this part, but apparently this song the Manson girls are singing when they're introduced is a song by Charles Manson himself called I'll Never Say Never to Always. It kind of gives the eeriness of the music that plays in their introduction an additional layer of creepiness. Anyway, after the first introduction to the Mansons, Rick goes home and rehearses his line for Lancer while Cliff heads home to his trailer behind the drive-in. We are introduced to his dog Brandy, who he clearly has well trained not only to be obedient but also to attack on command. Shortly after, Sharon and Roman head to the Playboy Mansion for the party, where we learn from Steve McQueen about the nature of the relationship between Sharon, Roman, and Jay as a trio. This is mostly important to explain the dynamics of why different people live at the house in different parts of the story, without having to follow them directly. It also, as mentioned earlier, has that cute tie-in with Treat Her Right. Now we're moving into Act 2, where we see Rick playing his part in Lancer's pilot episode, while he sends Cliff to go take care of his TV antenna on top of the house. Back at the house, we not only see the scars on Cliff from his days in war, but also the flamethrower that Rick kept from the 14 Fists of McCluskey sitting in his shed. Before the first take on Lancer that we see Rick in, Rick and Marabella talk briefly. He ends up crying because he's feeling old and exceedingly useless like the character Easy Breezy in the book he's reading, as he becomes more and more irrelevant as time goes on, just like Schwartz said. She cheers him up and then he goes to talk to Wanamaker. He coaches Rick on how he should play his part because it's not Rick's typical typecast cowboy role. One thing that is said in this part is that Rick is impressed with the girl playing Marabella and how sharp she is for her age, which leads to Wanamaker stressing that, quote, she never flubs a line, no one on this show ever does for that matter. Rick has some trouble due to his alcoholic tendencies where he forgets his lines, further cutting Rick with his feeling of irrelevance. Sam Wanamaker, by the way, is another real-life person character who was a director and actor that passed away in '93. He has a pretty interesting story. You may want to read it from Wikipedia if you get the chance. He was in the army in World War II, he was a communist sympathizer and fled to England for a while during the height of McCarthy's Red Scare, then came back and directed and produced the pilot for Lancer, which was also a real show, unlike Bounty Law, which was a fictional show closely related to the real show starring Steve McQueen, Wanted, Dead or Alive. Speaking of McQueen, I don't know why it took me till now to realize it, but this scene where we see Rick in The Great Escape, we see that in the Tarantino-verse, Rick was well on his way to being in McQueen's shoes. In a sense, he's an alternate timeline version of McQueen who didn't get the fame McQueen was able to enjoy, living in his shadow. Worse yet, he was the target of the Manson killers where McQueen invited his girlfriends to the party at the Polanskis, but instead she suggested an intimate night in. In a strange way, this makes me think of the quote from Half-Life 2.
The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world.
Flash over to Cliff, and we get a taste of how badass he is when he kicks the shit out of Bruce Lee in a flashback to the reason why he's no longer doing stunt work. We also get the picture that he has killed before, which is a good part of the reason why Cliff is no longer a stuntman. From here, we see Charles Manson asking around for the former residents of the Polanski residence, Terry and Candy. I'm going to read a little more history about this here. Bear with me. In 1968, Beach Boy Dennis Wilson introduced Melcher to ex-con and aspiring musician Charles Manson. Manson and his family had been living in Wilson's house at 14400 Sunset Boulevard after Wilson had picked up hitchhiking Manson family members Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey. Wilson expressed interest in Manson's music and also recorded 2 of Manson's songs with the Beach Boys. For a time, Melcher was interested in recording Manson's music, as well as making a film about the family and their hippie commune existence. Manson met Melcher at 10050 Cielo Drive, the home Melcher shared with his girlfriend, actress Candice Bergen, and with musician Mark Lindsay. Manson eventually auditioned for Melcher, but Melcher declined to sign him. There was still talk of a documentary being made about Manson's music, but Melcher abandoned the project after witnessing his subject become embroiled in a fight with a drunken stuntman at Spawn Ranch. Both Wilson and Melcher severed their ties with Manson, a move that angered Manson. Not long after that, Melcher and Bergen moved out of the Cielo Drive home. The house's owner, Rudy Altobelli, then leased it to film director Roman Polanski and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. Manson was reported to have visited the house on more than one occasion asking for Melcher, but was told that Melcher had moved. However, family member Charles Tex Watson stated that Manson and company did in fact know that Melcher was no longer living there, and Terry's former roommate, Mark Lindsay, stated, "Everybody speculated that Manson set his minions up there to get rid of Terry because he was angry about not getting a record deal." But Terry and I talked about it later, and Terry said Manson knew Melcher had moved because Manson or someone from his organization left a note on Terry's porch in Malibu. Reading this, I can't help but wonder if Cliff was loosely based on this drunken stuntman with no name, considering he does the same thing and is also a stuntman. After the freakout scene in the trailer, Rick gets the next scene flawlessly and even impresses Wanamaker. Marabella tells him that was the best acting she'd ever seen, and this gives Rick hope that maybe not all is lost. Flashing back over to Cliff again, and he's picked up Pussycat, played by Margaret Qualley. They had seen each other a few times on the road, her hitchhiking and him going in the other direction or being busy. But this time, they got to meet properly. She tells him that she lives at Spawn Ranch, and this piques his curiosity. Not only do they tie in because he's a former stuntman who used to do work for westerns in the 50s, but this is where Cliff goes there and encounters the Manson family for the first time. Surprisingly, they don't remember him, but he certainly remembers them later on, even while tripping on acid. Finally, the third and last act of the movie. Rick accepts the offer to work on spaghetti westerns, moves to Italy for a while, and makes a handful of movies. Unfortunately, spends too much money on renting his apartment there, and comes back not expecting really anything to turn up for him except to try and score next pilot season. On this night that they return to America, Rick clarifies that it will likely be the last time Cliff's services will be needed since Rick may retire if he can't find work. This being said, in the words of Kurt Russell voicing this part, when you come to the end of the line with a buddy who's a little more than a friend and a little less than a wife, getting blind drunk together is the only way to really say farewell. So they settle in, and that evening, Rick and Cliff go to a Mexican restaurant and get shit-faced. It just so happens that Sharon and Jay were also out at a Mexican restaurant that evening. However, at least Sharon wasn't drinking because she was late into her pregnancy. The two groups get home around the same time, and Cliff decides that tonight is the night to smoke the cigarette dipped in acid that he got before they went to Italy. What other night would he have smoked it on, since he said that he wanted to smoke it there, if Cliff and Rick were really going to part ways? So he walks down the road with Brandy in tow, smoking the cigarette, and as he's almost out of sight, a car filled with 4 members of the Manson cult are driving up Cielo Drive. They stop right at the end of the cul-de-sac, and Rick gets pissed off at the volume of the muffler, yells at them to get the fuck off the Cielo Drive. So they put it in reverse and park at the bottom. This matches pretty much precisely how the real events happened. They drove up to the top, Tex got out, climbed a phone pole, and cut the line to the Polanski residence. And then they backed down Cielo Drive and parked at the bottom before haunting their way up the road and killing their prey. Of course, Rick coming out put a damper on their plans. I'm pretty sure that's what led to what happens here, where instead of Linda, now Flower Child, being the lookout, she straight up drives off after saying that she forgot her knife in the car. Now, before they make their way up the hill, Cliff has already finished his walk with Brandy and goes to feed her, his trip setting in hard. All of a sudden, the Mansons bust in. The events that have happened leading up to this all culminate into this event here. Rick yelling at them made his house the new target, taking attention away from the Polanski residence, which was originally the target because both Watson and Manson had been there and were familiar with the layout, but obviously here that went out the window. Speaking of this scene, what Tex says when he busts in the front door of the house, "I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's business," is what Tex really said when he kicked Polanski's friend Frykowski in the head shortly after breaking in. Manson also told the women who went with Tex to leave a sign, something witchy, so they wrote pig on the door. This is reflected by what Sadie and Tex are saying before they get out of the car. The Mansons were pissed off because of what happened at the ranch, and sought to take revenge on the Hollywood phonies. Because of that event, Rick recognizes all 3 of them, even naming Tex. Brandy, who is well trained to attack on command, jumps at Tex on Cliff's command after Francesca is dragged out of the bedroom. Then, using his lethal capabilities, Cliff throws a full can of dog food at Sadie, which causes her to go into severe shock. He kills Katie brutally by smashing her face in after finishing off Tex with a stomp. And Sadie, still flailing around blinded from shock, ends up bursting through the sliding glass door leading to the back where Rick was casually listening to some music, unable to hear the gunshots and violence happening only a couple dozen feet away from him. She falls into the pool, bleeding everywhere, freaks him out, and Rick not only uses the training, but the flamethrower he kept from the 14 Fists of McCluskey to toast Sadie. And that's all she wrote. I think you can see now that this movie is a carefully calculated series of events that were lined up in a way to make it so that in the Tarantino-verse, the Mansons got their just desserts instead of being allowed to perform their series of gruesome killings. Rick even got a happy ending by getting a chance to meet with Jay Sebring and Sharon Tate, increasing his chances of getting into a movie, just how he wanted. Now, as I said earlier, I don't think it's the deepest movie Tarantino's ever made. If I were to pick one, it would probably be Jackie Brown for the way it deals with Jackie as a character. However, I think a lot of that credit should go to the novel it was based on, Rum Punch. Tarantino's not really known for making deep movies, mostly just bloody technical masterpieces. All that said, despite not being his deepest movie, I do think it was possibly the most intricate Tarantino has made, in technical aspects and in performance, and for all of those reasons, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a certified movie that doesn't suck. I'm sure you guys are all aware of what today's affiliate is about, but I'm going to give you a rundown on it just in case you weren't aware. I won't ever be affiliated with or sponsored by a company that I don't personally believe in or use, so keep that in mind. Private Internet Access is a VPN or virtual private network. It's a paid-for program that allows for encryption on your data so that you can keep yourself safe online. Everyone from hackers on a public Wi-Fi hotspot to your own internet service provider can see what you're doing online, and advertisers rely on your personal information that they take without your consent 24/7. If you want to fight against the wholesale of private information, get signed up for Private Internet Access today for as little as $3 a month and keep your browsing and shopping private. Thank you so much for watching. If you're a fan of my Kojima's Deception series, I wanted to let you know that the review of Death Stranding is coming soon, and I'll be continuing the Kojima's Deception series, despite my thought that I'd have to shift gears when talking about Death Stranding and Kojima, so keep your eyes peeled for those releases. I know this video was a bit controversial due to the discussion of Tarantino and the conditions he has subjected some of his actors to, but I felt it was important to share my thoughts. With that said, if you enjoyed this video, I've got 2 other episodes of this show that I've released previously that you may be interested in, whether or not you've seen the movies I discuss in those videos. Make sure to click the subscribe button for more videos like this one. Ring the bell to make sure you get notified of a release. Click that like button, share with your friends and your audiences, and leave a comment with your thoughts to show the algorithms that you want more content like this. Interaction is a surefire way to ensure better treatment from the algorithms, so any help in that regard is deeply appreciated. Anyway guys, until next time, this is Retro Hellspawn signing out. Have a good one.